Trying to upload my presentation now. I hope you all see my presentation and I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, you are good. Go ahead.
Great. So hello, good afternoon. My name is Juvina. I'm from Wright State University. The title of my talk today is Empirical Guidance for Computational Models of Interactive Learning. So humans learn to perform a wide range of tasks, and much of this learning occurs through interaction with the task environment and other learners, and I'm including experts here as well. The assumption is that knowledge is distributed in the world and in other agents, so it makes sense to try to combine that knowledge that is distributed. But there's also the danger that learners have incomplete, erroneous, or biased knowledge, so we have to be careful when aggregating that knowledge. Interactive learning has the potential to enhance our ability to solve problems of increasing complexity, as has been suggested in this new book edited by Gluck and Laird. So the overarching research questions that I'm addressing here can be seen from a human factors psychology perspective. I'm faculty in the human factor psychology program. The question there would be how to design team interaction and how to use technology to facilitate learning in humans. It can also be seen from an AI perspective. And the question there would be, how can AI learn from interacting with humans and support hybrid human-machine teams? So there's a long tradition in the cognitive architectures movement of looking for guidance from empirical research in psychology or in other cognitive sciences, including neuroscience, of course. So today I'm going to present an empirical study aiming to understand the mechanisms and outcomes of interactive learning. The task we're using in this study is the paired associate learning task, abbreviated as PAL. Basically, the subjects have to memorize 60 word number pairs, arbitrary word number pairs. And the key contrast we're investigating here is low versus high interactivity. So let's look at the experimental conditions. We have a peer-assisted learning condition, also abbreviated as PAL. We have an individual learning condition and then a passive learning condition. In the PAL condition, we have 4 learners interacting with each other. In the individual condition, we have just 1 learner, but that learner is interacting with the learning material. In the passive learning condition, the learner is just passively observing those word number pairs and trying to remember them. We have 6 learning sessions, and each session has an alternation of home time and school time. In home time, learners can do whatever they want. They can play, and there are some games available that they can choose from. They can be on their phone, they can browse the web, but also they have the option to study for school time if they want to. And we use that as a measure of their willingness to put effort into learning. Then in school time, they practice the paired associates task, and that goes on for 6 sessions. Then they have a break, and then they have a testing session where they are tested, their memory is tested for those 60 word number pairs. Now, between subjects, we have the 3 conditions that I mentioned. In the passive learning condition, the participants just see a word and then they see the number associated with that word. In the individual learning condition, they see a word, they generate the first answer, even if it's a guess, and then they receive the correct number for that word. In the peer-assisted learning condition, they generate the first answer. After seeing the word, they generate the first answer. Then they take they inspect their peers' responses, and they can take them if they like them, and then they receive the correct number. So we hypothesize that the active learning condition will outperform the passive learning condition. The peer-assisted learning condition will outperform the individual learning condition at test, so in the last session. Group performance would be higher than individual performance. The effort that participants put into learning, that is the amount of home time practice, will be lower in the PAL condition, and we thought that would be due to a social loafing effect. And peer inspection data, looking at other learners, will be informative with regard to the mechanisms of interactive learning. So here we're looking at some learning curves, and we have session number on the x-axis and accuracy on the y-axis. The black line is the peer-assisted learning condition. The red line, individual learning condition. The green dot is the passive learning condition. We don't have session by session data here because they are just passively observing the stimuli. The black line is broken down into first answer accuracy, second answer accuracy, and group answer. The group answer is the one on top. So what we see here is in the learning sessions, accuracy in the PAL condition is not higher than in the individual learning condition, as we expected. In the testing session, session 7, accuracy is actually lower in the PAL condition than in the individual learning condition. So this was a surprise. The group answer is more accurate than the individual answer. And this effect could be a wisdom of crowds effect, just an aggregation effect, or knowledge spillover effect, or both. It's likely a knowledge spillover effect because, as you see, the second answer is right below the group answer. So this suggests that players were able to recognize correct answers in their peers and take them as their second answer. Next, we're zooming into the PAL condition to understand and directly test a peer effect. And here we're looking at a correlation between maximum peer accuracy in session n-1 and the learner accuracy in session n. We see there is a significant correlation there. Basically, a 1 unit increase in peer accuracy causes a quarter unit increase in learner accuracy. That means interacting with a knowledgeable peer in the previous session causes improved accuracy in the current session, and vice versa. If you don't have a knowledgeable peer in the previous session, you are likely to perform not so well in the current session. So this indicates a significant peer effect, even though it's a small effect. Now we're looking at taking a peer's answer, and we have session again on the x-axis, and we have proportion of taking peer's answers, the black line, on the y-axis, and we also have the accuracy for your own answer, red line, or the peer's answer, green line. And we see here that taking peer's answers occurs quite frequently, even though it slightly decreases with learning. And it generally occurs when learner's accuracy is low, even though it's increasing due to learning. And we also see that the accuracy of the peer becomes higher and higher as learners learn, but also they learn to better recognize the accuracy in their peers. The green line doesn't go all the way up to 1, which means that sometimes they take inaccurate responses from their peers. But in general, they are able to distinguish between accurate and inaccurate responses in their peers. Now we're looking at effort, or how long participants studied at home in each condition. And we have conditions on the x-axis and time on the y-axis. And we see that in the PAL condition, participants did not study less at home as we expected. So social loafing cannot explain their poor performance at test. In fact, they studied significantly more than the other conditions. And this is interesting in itself. But the question is that related to test performance at all? And the answer is yes. And here we're looking at correlations between home time study and final test accuracy. And we're plotting the magnitude of these correlations on the y-axis. So obviously, there is a positive correlation in all the conditions, but the magnitude of this correlation is maximal in the PAL condition. So far, these findings are consistent with an overall positive peer effect acting via two channels, a knowledge channel and a motivation channel. So the knowledge channel is the knowledge spillover from peers. The motivation channel is the higher effort when peers are around. So why does this effect not lead to better test performance? This is the puzzling question that we're trying to answer by looking at inspection data. So that is looking at peers, regardless whether their responses were correct or incorrect. So looking at peers decreases with learning, but it stays relatively high. And what we see is that in the PAL condition, learners are exposed to roughly as many incorrect responses as correct ones. So even though they are able to distinguish the correct ones during the learning sessions, the incorrect associates that they might form may persist in memory and interfere with the retrieval of correct responses at test. So it may be that the positive peer effect have been offset by a negative interference effect. So in summary, we see a positive peer effect via the knowledge channel as knowledge spillover from peers, and the motivation channel as increased willingness to practice in the PAL condition. And we also see a negative peer effect via the knowledge channel through exposure to incorrect responses. So I'm going to sketch now, just present some ideas about how this could be modeled in cognitive architecture. So first, for the knowledge channel, assuming the model reads and encodes the stimulus, the word, and if they are not required to respond as in the passive condition, then they just read the correct number and associate the two and reinforce them in memory. But if they are required to respond, they would attempt to retrieve a word number pair, just in case they've studied that before. And if they can't retrieve it, they generate a guess, a random answer. If they can retrieve it, then just that retrieval will reinforce the activation of that associate in memory. And they would generate a response. Since we don't have peers in this condition, the response will be associated with they will also get feedback, and they will form a correct associate in memory and will reinforce that. If they can look at peers' answers, then they would have to first select a peer to look at based on peer reputation or trustworthiness. And I don't know if I said this, but they did not have to look at all the peers. We use this mouse tracking methodology or poor man's eye tracking methodology. They could request peers' answers, so they could hover their mouse over a peer to see their answer. So the model can select a peer based on what they've learned about that particular person. Then they look at the peer response, and just perceiving that response, we assume that this reinforces the associate in memory. So before they determine whether the answer is correct or incorrect, they have already formed an associate, and that is the source of interference. Then they determine whether the answer is correct or not, and If it's correct, they trigger a positive reward. If it's incorrect, a negative reward. And that signal is used to learn the peer reputation or trustworthiness. Then they generate a second response, read the correct response, and make the correct association and reinforcement in memory. So this is a process model for the knowledge channel. Now let's look at the process model, the sketch of a process model for the motivation channel. So the model will select a level of effort or an amount of practice. And if they are not required to respond as in the passive learning condition, they will read the correct answer and get an extrinsic reward if they get it right. I didn't mention before, but we offered points for individual performance, group performance, and even for relaxation gains. If they are required to respond, they get an intrinsic reward just from getting it right. If peers can see your answer, then we're assuming that players form sophisticated beliefs about peers. For example, they estimate their level of effort, knowing that they also estimate our own levels of effort. And they adjust their own level of effort to coordinate with their peers. So basically, they play a minimum effort coordination game, and they get positive social reward if they coordinate with their peers, and negative social reward if they don't coordinate with their peers. This reward is used to learn a level of effort that is optimal for this particular group. And then they go on and read the correct response and get the extrinsic feedback, the extrinsic reward. So these are just some ideas about modeling. As work in progress, we have a series of studies on knowledge-based reasoning and problem solving focused on interactive learning. We have the RAT-PAL study, which is in progress, that uses the remote associates test. This is much more demanding for knowledge than the paired associates test, because players have to search through a large knowledge base, basically the vocabulary knowledge that someone learned in their life, and models would have the same challenge, would have to search through a large knowledge base. Similarities, occurrences, and co-occurrences will be important there. We also have
about 3 minutes left.
Thank you. I'm almost done. We also have the MAT-PAL study that we're just designing at this point. This uses the Miller analogies test. It's basically an intelligence or intelligence/knowledge test. Here, participants have to search through a structured knowledge base or ontology. They have to map relational structures. They have to find relationships between relationships. So let me go over nuggets and calls quickly. So we find this evidence of positive peer effects. I think this is good news for this idea of combining multiple minds into superminds, as Malone suggested. It makes sense to raise intelligence. We have a lot more leverage to raise intelligence via combining minds than by other means. And the minds can be natural or artificial. Peer-assisted learning may be particularly useful in knowledge-intensive tasks. And cognitive architectures like ACT-R and SOAR are well suited to model this kind of effects. ACT-R through memory spreading, activation, priming, etc., and SOAR with reasoning in substates for peer modeling and handling large amounts of structured knowledge. The call is that we have to be careful about this interference. Not all knowledge that comes from humans is of quality or valuable. And of course, we still have some modeling challenges that we need to overcome, which is one example of that is forming sophisticated beliefs about others and reasoning on them. Some acknowledgements for people in my lab and contact info, and I will be happy to answer questions.
So thank you. I don't see any questions in the chat right now.